There are plenty of reasons why a bird might slam into a glass window and die, but the scariest part is that most of the time it's completely avoidable. In fact, humans have known about this issue for hundreds of years. People have been putting up warning signs and taking other measures to prevent bird strikes since at least the Middle Ages. And yet today, an estimated 500 million to 1 billion birds die from flying into windows every year. So how is it even possible that these animals can't figure out that a giant pane of glass isn't exactly, a wall? Well, there are 4 main reasons. First, sometimes it's just an illusion. You see, we humans typically think of glass as a solid object. We know that if we walk into it, we'll feel pain. But to a bird, a sheet of glass is basically invisible. Birds need to be able to see through the objects in their environment to hunt and to navigate. So they've evolved to recognize what parts of their surroundings are made of stuff they can see through, and what's made of solid stuff they can't. Glass doesn't reflect much light. It's not opaque, and it doesn't cast shadows. So to a bird, a transparent piece of glass is basically the same as air. And just like they ignore bugs, leaves, and each other when they're flying, they also don't avoid glass. If a bird runs into a window, it probably just thinks that it hit another bird or some kind of leaf or something. Usually they're fine, but sometimes they can get injured enough to die. Now, that brings us to the second reason why birds run into glass. Sometimes it reflects things that look like they're made of solid stuff. And we're not talking about reflections of other birds or bugs or leaves. We mean reflections of trees, mountains, the sky, or anything else that would indicate there's actually something else there. A study published in 2008 found that when one group of birds was tested in an experimental room with a mirrored wall, they spent more time near the mirror than any other part of the wall, pecking, probing, and even trying to fly through it. Researchers believe this is because birds rely on visual cues, like the way an object reflects light, to figure out what it's made of. So when a bird sees the reflection of a forest in a pane of glass, it assumes there's a forest there and flies into it. The same goes for reflections of clouds or the sky, which could both be mistaken for open areas where there's lots of food. And it's a similar story for reflections of water, which can indicate the presence of aquatic plants and insects. In some cases, the reflection is the only thing that seems to be calling to a bird. One study found that songbirds were more likely to fly into a window with a reflective surface if the interior of the building was dark. Then the birds inside the building couldn't see anything else in the window at all, so they were just looking at the reflection. In general, birds tend to be drawn to reflections that show them some kind of open space, because that's where they'd usually go to look for food. And sometimes those reflections are misleading. Many glass buildings have large windows, which reflect the sky or clouds, making the entire structure look like a big open space where a bird could potentially find something to eat. And it's not just the image itself that's attracting the birds, it's also the absence of anything else. As we mentioned before, birds don't really see glass as an obstacle. So when they fly toward a reflective window, they aren't expecting to bump into anything, which makes sense given that the window doesn't really look like there's anything behind it. In fact, studies have shown that birds will fly into a window if there's nothing reflected at all, as long as the window doesn't appear to have anything else in it. So it's not necessarily the reflection itself that leads to bird strikes, but what that reflection is hiding. Of course, not all windows reflect images outside the building. Some reflect our own light, and our light does not play nicely with our feathery friends either. These artificial lights can make flying at night especially dangerous for migrating birds. See, at night, birds navigating using landmarks on the ground like rivers and roads or the stars above them to help them stay on track. But when these animals encounter brightly lit buildings, they can become confused. In particular, researchers peg large glass buildings in urban areas as especially problematic since they reflect and amplify the city lights around them. And as far as the birds are concerned, all that extra light means there's probably tons of food around. You see, in nature, light pollution of this magnitude only happens in places like volcanic vents, hot springs, and fireflies. None of those places have glass buildings, and all of them have lots of insects that birds love to eat. So it's no wonder that birds are attracted to them. But while birds are often able to avoid these confusing areas during the day, that's not always possible at night. So when migrating birds encounter bright lights coming from a glass building, they fly right into it and end up dying. In fact, this attraction to light at night has been around long enough that we humans have come up with all sorts of ways to protect birds from it. For example, we can turn off unnecessary lights or install motion sensors to delay turning on the lights until after sunset, or use special glass that filters out certain wavelengths of light. Or if all else fails, we can hang up little decals like these ones here that resemble owls. And we don't want to scare the birds away. We just want to confuse them a little bit so they don't see the building at all. Now, while all of those countermeasures do help, they're not foolproof. And that brings us to the fourth reason why birds crash into glass and die. While it might seem like one bird running into a window is just a fluke accident, oftentimes it's not. You see, birds tend to travel in flocks, and flocking behavior comes with both benefits and drawbacks. On the one hand, being in a flock makes it easier to find food, avoid predators, and navigate during migration. But on the other hand, if one bird makes a mistake, other birds in the flock are likely to follow its lead. And if the flock is big enough, that can result in even more collisions and even more deaths. So all of these unfortunate accidents aren't just a problem for individual birds. They can take out huge swaths of a migrating population. For instance, in 2016, an estimated 10,000 red knots died after colliding with a glass skyscraper in Kuwait City. And that was just one incident involving one species. Every year, countless other incidents take the lives of countless other birds. That's why it's so important to try and fix this problem. Luckily, scientists and bird lovers all over the world are working on it. Thanks for watching.